I've always believed in the power of solitude to heal and inspire. But nothing could have prepared me for the terrifying solitude I experienced last summer at Shell Beach. The events that unfolded there have haunted me ever since, changing how I view the thin veil between our world and the echoes of the past. The decision to rent the isolated cabin at Shell Beach came in the wake of a bitter divorce that had left me emotionally drained and creatively blocked. As I drove down the winding coastal road, the sea mist curled around my car like ghostly fingers, as if trying to hold me back. But I pressed on, desperate for the peace I hoped to find. The cabin emerged from the fog, a weathered wooden structure perched on the edge of a secluded stretch of coastline. Its salt-stained windows seemed to watch me as I approached, carrying my suitcase and a box of writing supplies. Stepping onto the creaking porch, I breathed in the salty air, feeling a sense of calm wash over me for the first time in months. The constant rhythm of the waves promised the solitude I craved. That first evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I felt hopeful. This place, I thought, would be my sanctuary, my path back to emotional healing and creative rebirth. Little did I know that the tranquility of Shell Beach was merely a facade, concealing dark secrets that would soon upend my life. The first few days passed in a blur of quiet contentment. I fell into a soothing routine. Mornings spent writing on the porch, afternoons walking along the shore collecting shells, and evenings curled up by the fireplace with a good book. The isolation that had seemed so daunting in my city life now felt like a balm to my wounded soul. The constant sound of the waves and the cry of seagulls became a meditative backdrop to my thoughts. My writing flowed more freely than it had in years. I found myself penning a story about redemption and second chances, mirroring my own hopes for a fresh start. But as the days wore on, I began to notice subtle changes. The shadows seemed to grow longer, the nights darker, and sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I caught glimpses of movement where there should have been none. At first, I dismissed these as tricks of light or figments of my imagination. But deep down, a sense of unease began to take root, whispering that all was not as it seemed at Shell Beach. It was on the night of the full moon that everything changed. I had been working late, the words flowing freely as I crafted a particularly intense scene. The cabin was silent save for the scratching of my pen and the distant crash of waves. A flicker of movement caught my eye, drawing my gaze to the window. There, bathed in moonlight, stood a man. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in the antiquated uniform of a ship's captain. His face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes, God, his eyes were filled with such profound sadness that it made my heart ache. I blinked, certain I was seeing things. But when I looked again, he was still there, staring directly at me. His lips moved, as if he was trying to speak, but no sound reached my ears. Panic gripped me. I scrambled to my feet, knocking over my chair in the process. By the time I had steadied myself and looked back, the figure was gone. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew what I had seen was all too real. The next morning, still shaken by my experience, I decided to dive into the history of Shell Beach. The cabin had a small bookshelf filled with local lore and history volumes. As I pored over them, certain phrases caught my eye. The wreck of the Mermaid's Tear, Captain Elias Blackwood's Folly, The Curse of Shell Beach. One book, in particular, gave me pause. It detailed a shipwreck that had occurred exactly 100 years ago. The Mermaid's Tear, captained by Elias Blackwood, had run aground during a violent storm. The entire crew perished, save for the captain, who was found wandering the beach, driven mad by guilt and grief. The locals whispered that Blackwood had deliberately led his ship to doom, lured by the siren song of the sea. As punishment, his spirit was cursed to roam Shell Beach, seeking redemption or a soul to take his place. As I read these words, a chill ran down my spine. The description of Captain Blackwood matched perfectly with the apparition I had seen. I realized with growing dread that my peaceful retreat had become something far more sinister. In the days that followed, the ghostly encounters intensified. The captain's apparition appeared with increasing frequency, no longer confined to the full moon. I would catch glimpses of him standing on the beach at twilight, his sorrowful gaze fixed on the horizon. Sometimes, I'd wake in the dead of night to find him at the foot of my bed, his spectral form flickering like a candle in the wind. Each appearance left me more shaken than the last. The air would grow frigid, and the scent of salt and seaweed would overwhelm my senses. Whispers echoed through the cabin, too faint to make out words but clear enough to send chills down my spine. I found myself jumping at every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind. Sleep became elusive, and when it did come, it was plagued by nightmares of drowning, of being dragged into the depths by cold, ghostly hands. The isolation that had once been a comfort now felt oppressive. I longed for human contact, for some assurance that I wasn't losing my mind. But each time I considered leaving, something held me back. A mixture of fear and a growing, inexplicable sense of obligation to unravel this mystery. As the hauntings escalated, I delved deeper into my research, desperate for answers. In a dusty tome hidden behind the others, I found the truth I had been seeking, and wished I hadn't. The curse of Captain Blackwood was more terrible than I had imagined. Every 100 years, on the anniversary of the wreck, the captain's ghost would seek out a living soul to take his place. If successful, he would finally find peace, while the chosen victim would be doomed to haunt Shell Beach for the next century. With growing horror, I realized that the centennial of the Mermaid's Tear's demise was mere days away. The captain's increasing appearances, his pleading looks, it all made sense now. He wasn't just haunting me, he was preparing to claim me. As this realization sank in, a storm began to brew outside, the wind howling like a banshee. I knew, with chilling certainty, that I was running out of time. The final confrontation was coming, whether I was ready for it or not. On the 100th anniversary of the Mermaid's Tear's demise, a violent storm descended upon Shell Beach. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled with an almost human voice. I huddled in the cabin, every nerve on edge, knowing that this was the night everything would come to a head. As the clock struck midnight, the door burst open with a thunderous crack. There stood Captain Blackwood, more solid and terrifying than ever before. Seawater cascaded from his clothes, and his eyes glowed with an unearthly light. "Your time has come," he intoned, his voice a mixture of desperation and triumph. "Take my place and grant me peace." I scrambled backwards, my heart pounding. "I won't," I gasped. "I can't." But the captain advanced, his form flickering between flesh and spectral mist. Cold, wet hands grasped at me, trying to drag me into his embrace. I could feel my very essence being pulled away, as if he was trying to swap our souls. In a moment of panic-driven clarity, I remembered an old legend: ghosts couldn't cross running water. With a burst of adrenaline, I shoved past him and ran out into the storm. The beach was a maelstrom of wind and waves, but I didn't hesitate. I plunged into the raging sea, the ghost's anguished cries echoing behind me. The icy water shocked my system, waves crashing over my head. As I struggled against the current, I saw spectral forms rising from the depths, the long-dead crew of the Mermaid's Tear, reaching for me with skeletal hands. Just as I thought all was lost, a light pierced the darkness. A fishing boat, driven off course by the storm, had spotted me. Rough hands pulled me from the water, voices shouting over the wind. As the fishermen wrapped me in blankets, I babbled my story. To my surprise, they exchanged knowing looks. The oldest among them spoke of the curse, of others who had encountered the ghostly captain over the years. As we sailed away from Shell Beach, I watched the cabin grow smaller in the distance. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing on the shore. The captain, his form dissipating like mist in the morning sun. I never returned to Shell Beach, but the experience haunts me still. On stormy nights, I sometimes hear the distant cry of a ship's bell, and in my dreams, I see those sorrowful eyes, still searching for redemption across the centuries. As a novelist, I've always been drawn to the mysterious and the unknown. But nothing in my years of crafting fictional horrors could have prepared me for the real terror I experienced 2 years ago on Whisper Beach. The events that unfolded there have haunted me ever since, changing how I view the world and the secrets that lie beneath the surface of our reality. The decision to move to Whisper Beach came after my third novel flopped. I needed a change of scenery, somewhere isolated where I could reconnect with my creativity. When I found the old beach house online, it seemed perfect, a weathered wooden structure perched on the edge of a secluded stretch of coastline. As I drove down the winding coastal road, the sea mist curled around my car like ghostly fingers. The house emerged from the fog, its weathered shingles and salt-stained windows a testament to years of facing the ocean's wrath. Stepping onto the creaking porch, I breathed in the salty air, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. The constant rhythm of the waves promised the solitude I craved. That first evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I felt hopeful. This place, I thought, would be my sanctuary, my path back to literary success. Little did I know that the tranquility of Whisper Beach was merely a facade, concealing dark secrets that would soon upend my life. The first few nights passed uneventfully. I settled into a routine, spending my days writing and my evenings walking along the shore. But on the fourth night, as I lay in bed, I heard it, a faint whisper carried on the sea breeze. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, but the whispers grew clearer, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from the ocean itself, a chorus of indistinct voices calling out in the darkness. I got up and peered out the window. The beach was empty, bathed in moonlight. Yet the whispers continued, rising and falling like the tide. Sleep became elusive. Each night, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. I caught fragments of words, pleas for help, cries of anguish. The peaceful lull of waves I had enjoyed was replaced by an unsettling cacophony of spectral voices. My writing suffered as exhaustion set in. I began to question my decision to come here, wondering if the isolation was playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right at Whisper Beach. One foggy morning, desperate for answers, I walked along the shoreline, the wet sand squelching beneath my feet. The whispers had kept me awake all night, and I hoped the crisp sea air would clear my head. That's when I saw it, a dark shape half buried in the sand, revealed by the receding tide. As I drew closer, I realized it was a weathered burlap sack, crusted with salt and seaweed. My heart raced as I knelt to examine it. With trembling hands, I opened the sack. Inside, I found a collection of jet-black seashells, each inscribed with strange, glowing symbols. Nestled among them was an old, leather-bound journal, its pages warped by seawater. As I touched the shells, a chill ran through my body. The whispers, which had been a constant background noise, suddenly intensified. I could have sworn I heard my name among the unintelligible murmurs. Clutching the sack to my chest, I hurried back to the house, sand flying behind me. I didn't know what I had found, but I felt certain it was the key to understanding the strange occurrences at Whisper Beach. Back in the safety of the house, I spread the contents of the sack on my writing desk. The black shells gleamed ominously in the sunlight streaming through the window. As I reached for the journal, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, scattering my manuscript pages across the floor. Strangely, when I gathered the pages, I found they were blank. My entire novel, weeks of work, had vanished without a trace. Panic set in as I checked my laptop, only to find all my files corrupted. Over the next few days, more inexplicable events plagued me. Doors slammed shut on their own. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. One morning, I woke to find seawater flooding the kitchen, despite all windows and doors being closed. The worst came when I was preparing dinner. As I reached for a knife, it seemed to move on its own, slicing deep into my palm. The cut burned as if the blade had been dipped in salt water. Throughout it all, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. At night, dark shapes flitted at the edge of my vision, always disappearing when I turned to look. Sleep became impossible as nightmares of drowning jolted me awake, gasping for air. I knew, with growing dread, that by bringing those shells into my home, I had unleashed something terrifying. Something that wouldn't rest until it had consumed me entirely. Desperate for answers, I turned my attention to the black shells and the waterlogged journal. Under a magnifying glass, the glowing inscriptions on the shells seemed to shift and change, defying any attempt to decipher them. Each time I thought I'd grasped their meaning, it slipped away like sand through my fingers. The journal proved equally challenging. Most pages were illegible, the ink blurred by seawater. But fragments remained, hinting at dark rituals and ancient magics. One passage stood out: "The shells are vessels, trapping souls of the drowned. A curse upon those who disturb their rest." As I read those words aloud, the whispers surged, and I felt an oppressive weight settle over the room. The shells seemed to pulse with an eerie light, and for a moment, I thought I saw faces reflected in their glossy surfaces, contorted in anguish, silently screaming. My research expanded to local legends and maritime history. I discovered that Whisper Beach had a dark past, with an unusually high number of drownings and shipwrecks. The locals avoided the area, speaking in hushed tones about the hungry sea and lost souls. As my investigation deepened, so did the horror surrounding me. The whispers became a constant cacophony, making it impossible to concentrate. I caught glimpses of spectral figures in mirrors and windows, their waterlogged forms reaching out with grasping hands before vanishing. Sleep, when it came, brought vivid nightmares. I found myself drowning repeatedly, pulled down by unseen forces into the dark depths. I'd wake up gasping, my lungs burning as if filled with salt water. One night, I jolted awake to find my bed surrounded by a pool of seawater. As I scrambled to my feet, I saw wet footprints leading from the front door to my bedroom. Footprints that vanished before my eyes. The malevolent presence in the house grew stronger. Objects flew across rooms, shattering against walls. Seaweed and barnacles began growing on the inside walls, spreading like a malignant infection. I knew I was no longer safe in my own home. Whatever I had unleashed was growing stronger, feeding off my fear. I had to find a way to end this curse before it consumed me entirely. In a feverish state of exhaustion and terror, I pored over the journal, desperately seeking a solution. As dawn broke, casting an eerie light through the seaweed-encrusted windows, I finally uncovered the terrible truth. The shells were part of an ancient ritual, designed to trap the souls of those who died at sea. They were a barrier, preventing restless spirits from wreaking havoc on the living world. By removing them from the water, I had inadvertently released these tortured souls. The journal spoke of a man, a self-proclaimed guardian of the shore, who had taken it upon himself to perform this macabre duty. For years, he had collected the bodies of the drowned, binding their souls to the black shells and returning them to the depths. But the toll of his grim task had eventually driven him mad. As I read his final, frantic entries, I realized with horror that I had not just unleashed the trapped souls. I had assumed the mantle of the guardian. The spirits were drawn to me, demanding that I complete the ritual and return them to their watery prison. The whispers grew to a deafening roar, and I knew what I had to do. With trembling hands, I gathered the shells and the journal, stuffing them back into the burlap sack. The spirits, sensing my intentions, grew frenzied. The house shook as if in the grip of an earthquake, and a howling wind tore through the rooms, shattering windows and sending furniture flying. I stumbled out onto the beach, the sack clutched tightly to my chest. The sky had turned an ominous dark gray, and the waves crashed violently against the shore. I knew I had to return the shells to the sea, but the thought of wading into those turbulent waters filled me with paralyzing fear. As I hesitated at the water's edge, spectral hands emerged from the waves, reaching for me. Voices that had once been whispers now screamed in my mind, begging for release, for peace. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself for what I had to do. I waded into the frigid water, each step feeling like an eternity. I knew that to end this nightmare, I would have to swim out beyond the breakers and return the shells to the deep. With a final look back at the shore, I plunged into the roiling sea. The moment I submerged, the world around me changed. The water turned black as ink, and ghostly faces swirled around me, their mouths open in silent screams. The current pulled at me, dragging me further from shore with unnatural strength. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the turbulent sea. Waves crashed over me, filling my mouth with salty water. I struggled to keep the sack clutched to my chest as I swam, my limbs growing heavier with each stroke. Suddenly, I felt the seafloor drop away beneath me. I had reached the deep water. The spirit's cries reached a fever pitch in my mind, urging me to complete the ritual. With the last of my strength, I opened the sack. As the shells slipped into the darkness below, a profound silence fell. For a moment, everything was still. Then, a massive wave rose up, carrying me with it. I caught a glimpse of peaceful faces in the water, no longer anguished but serene, before the wave crashed down. I was tossed about in the churning water, my lungs burning for air. Just as I thought I would drown, another wave flung me towards the shore. I landed hard on the wet sand, coughing and gasping. As I lay on the beach, the storm subsided as quickly as it had begun. The whispers were gone, replaced by the normal sounds of waves lapping at the shore. I staggered back to the house, finding it eerily normal. No seaweed, no water damage, as if the past weeks had never happened. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to normal. My manuscript reappeared, intact. The strange occurrences ceased. Yet, I was forever changed by the experience. I stayed at Whisper Beach, feeling an inexplicable connection to the place. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I think I hear faint whispers carried on the breeze. Not menacing, but grateful. A reminder of the thin veil between our world and what lies beyond. I've never shared this story until now. Some might call it a writer's fancy, a product of an overactive imagination. But I know the truth. And I'll always respect the deep, dark secrets the sea keeps. As a marine biologist, I've always been drawn to the mysteries of the ocean. But nothing in my years of studying tidal pools and coastal ecosystems could have prepared me for what I encountered 6 months ago at Coral Beach. The events that unfolded there have haunted me ever since, changing how I view the world beneath the waves and the thin line between the known and the unknown. The decision to spend a solitary weekend at Coral Beach came after months of grueling work on my doctoral thesis. I needed a break, somewhere quiet where I could clear my head and reconnect with the natural world that had inspired my career choice. When a colleague mentioned the secluded beach famous for its natural tidal pools, it seemed perfect. As I drove down the winding coastal road, the sea breeze carried the salty scent of adventure. The beach emerged from around a bend, a crescent of golden sand embraced by rugged cliffs. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the shore, and I could see the glint of water in the tidal pools left by the receding tide. I parked my car near a weathered wooden sign that read, "Coral Beach, tread carefully." The only sound was the gentle lapping of waves and the distant cry of seagulls. Perfect solitude. As I unloaded my gear into the small beachfront cabin I'd rented, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This weekend, I thought, would be a chance to recharge and refocus. Little did I know that the tranquility of Coral Beach was merely a facade, concealing dark secrets that would soon challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world. After settling in, I decided to take a walk along the shore as the sun dipped below the horizon. The beach was bathed in twilight, the sand cool beneath my bare feet. I carried a small flashlight, more out of habit than necessity, as the full moon provided ample illumination. As I approached the tidal pools, I switched on my light to get a better look. The pools were like miniature ecosystems, teeming with small crustaceans, colorful anemones, and tiny fish trapped until the next high tide. It was a familiar sight, one that usually filled me with wonder. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. In one of the larger pools, I noticed a dark shape moving. At first, I thought it might be a fish or perhaps a piece of seaweed caught in a current. But as I watched, the movement became more deliberate, more intentional. I leaned in closer, my scientific curiosity overriding my growing unease. The shape seemed to react to my presence, sliding smoothly to the far side of the pool. When I moved my light, it darted behind a rock, as if hiding. "Hello," I called out, feeling slightly foolish. Of course, there was no response, just the soft lapping of waves. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Perhaps it was just a trick of the light, or my tired mind playing tricks on me. But as I continued my walk, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every pool I passed seemed to hold more shadows, more movements just at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look directly, everything appeared normal, but the moment I looked away, the shifting shadows returned. By the time I made it back to the cabin, my heart was racing. I told myself it was just my imagination, fueled by isolation and the eerie moonlight. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right at Coral Beach. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the waves, I could have sworn I heard whispers carried on the breeze, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. The next morning, I awoke to brilliant sunshine streaming through the cabin windows. The events of the previous night seemed like a distant dream in the light of day. Eager to begin my relaxing weekend, I grabbed my research kit and headed out to explore the tidal pools. The beach was transformed by daylight, a postcard-perfect scene of golden sand and sparkling blue water. As I approached the pools, I felt a familiar excitement. This was my element, after all. I spent hours cataloging the diverse marine life trapped in these temporary aquariums. Hermit crabs scuttled across miniature sandy beaches, sea stars clung to rocky outcroppings, and colorful fish darted through swaying fronds of seaweed. It was paradise for a marine biologist. Yet, as the day wore on, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. More than once, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, only to find nothing when I turned to look. The water in some pools seemed to ripple without cause, and I could have sworn I saw handprints appearing on wet rocks, only to vanish moments later. I tried to focus on my work, but the sense of being watched grew stronger. When I looked out to sea, the waves seemed to form faces for split seconds before crashing onto the shore. I shook my head, blaming the sun and my isolation for these strange perceptions. As evening approached, I packed up my gear, my excitement replaced by a gnawing apprehension about the coming night. That evening, I sat in the cabin, poring over my notes from the day. The logical part of my mind insisted that everything I'd seen had a rational explanation. But another part, a more primal instinct, whispered that something was terribly wrong at Coral Beach. Unable to shake my unease, I decided to research the history of the area. The cabin had a small bookshelf with local guidebooks and history volumes. As I flipped through them, certain phrases caught my eye. Mysterious disappearances, local legends of sea spirits, inexplicable tidal patterns. One book, in particular, gave me pause. It mentioned an old fisherman's tale about shadow people who lived in the tidal pools, luring unsuspecting visitors to watery graves. I scoffed at the idea, but a chill ran down my spine nonetheless. As night fell, I ventured out onto the porch, drawn by the sound of approaching footsteps. An old man, weather-beaten and leathery, was walking along the beach. When he saw me, he paused. "You shouldn't be here," he called out, his voice gravelly and ominous. I approached him, introducing myself and explaining my research. His eyes narrowed. "The pools," he said, glancing nervously at the water. "They hide things. Things that ain't natural. If you're smart, you'll leave come morning." Before I could ask more, he hurried away, leaving me with more questions than answers. That night, the whispers from the sea grew louder. As I tossed and turned in bed, I could have sworn I heard my name being called, the sound drifting in through the open window on the salty breeze. I knew I should leave, but my scientific curiosity was piqued. What was really happening at Coral Beach? I was determined to find out, no matter the cost. As the third night fell, I found myself drawn back to the beach. The moon hung low and large, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The tidal pools glimmered like black mirrors, reflecting the starry sky above. I approached the water's edge, my flashlight beam dancing across the wet sand. The whispers I'd heard the night before seemed to intensify, becoming a soft but persistent chorus emanating from the sea. It was as if the ocean itself was trying to communicate. Gathering my courage, I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" The whispers ceased abruptly, replaced by an unnatural silence. Even the waves seemed to hold their breath. Then, slowly, the murmurs resumed, but this time they seemed more focused, more intent. I leaned closer to one of the larger tidal pools, straining to make out words in the watery susurrations. For a moment, I thought I heard my name, followed by pleas or warnings in a language I couldn't understand. Suddenly, the surface of the pool rippled violently. I stumbled back, heart pounding, as a dark shape rose from the water. It was vaguely humanoid but fluid, like a shadow given three-dimensional form. Two pinpricks of pale light gazed at me from where eyes should be. I scrambled away, my scientific mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It defied everything I knew about marine biology, about reality itself. Yet there it was, a figure of darkness and water, regarding me with what felt like ancient alien intelligence. As quickly as it had appeared, the figure melted back into the pool, leaving only ripples as evidence of its existence. The whispers resumed, more urgent now, filled with a desperation that chilled me to my core. I fled back to the cabin, my mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. What had I just witnessed? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? Sleep eluded me that night. When I did manage to drift off, My dreams were filled with terrifying visions of drowning. I felt icy hands pulling me down into bottomless black waters, while whispered voices promised both salvation and doom. I woke gasping for air, my sheets soaked with sweat. The line between nightmare and reality began to blur. Had I really seen a shadowy figure rise from the tidal pool, or was my mind playing tricks on me? Throughout the day, I found myself jumping at every sound, every shadow. The tidal pools, once a source of fascination, now filled me with dread. I could no longer look at them without imagining dark shapes lurking just beneath the surface. I tried to distract myself with work, reviewing my notes and samples. But every time I looked up from my microscope, I could have sworn I saw wet footprints on the cabin floor, only to blink and find them gone. The whispers continued, no longer confined to the night. They seemed to follow me everywhere, a constant susurration just at the edge of comprehension. Sometimes they sounded pleading, other times threatening. As the sun began to set on my fourth day at Coral Beach, I knew I was facing something beyond my understanding. The rational part of my mind was at war with what I had experienced. I needed proof, one way or another. With trembling hands, I prepared my camera and voice recorder. Tonight, I would return to the beach and face whatever was out there. Little did I know, the horrors I had experienced so far were only the beginning. Armed with my camera and voice recorder, I ventured out as darkness fell. The beach was eerily still, the usual sounds of lapping waves and night birds conspicuously absent. The air felt thick, almost oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was charged with an unnatural energy. As I approached the tidal pools, my flashlight beam caught something that made my heart skip a beat. The water in the pools was moving against the tide, swirling in unnatural patterns. I quickly snapped several photos, my hands shaking as I adjusted the focus. Suddenly, the whispers erupted all around me, no longer just from the sea but seemingly from the air itself. I fumbled with my voice recorder, desperate to capture the sound. As I listened through my headphones, my blood ran cold. Among the unintelligible murmurs, I could clearly hear my name being called over and over. Then, I saw them. Dark figures, more solid than before, rising from the pools. They were humanoid but wrong somehow, their proportions distorted and their movements fluid and unnatural. I stood frozen in terror as they began to emerge from the water, their featureless faces turned towards me. In a panic, I turned to run, but my foot caught on a rock, sending me sprawling onto the sand. As I scrambled to my feet, I saw wet, black handprints appearing on the beach around me, as if invisible entities were crawling towards me. I ran back to the cabin, slamming and locking the door behind me. As I huddled in the corner, trying to catch my breath, I realized with growing horror that the whispers had followed me. They were coming from inside the cabin. Dawn broke, but it brought no comfort. I had spent the night wide awake, listening to the whispers that seemed to emanate from every shadow. As sunlight crept through the windows, I gathered my courage to review the evidence I had collected. The photos showed blurry, dark shapes in the water, could be easily dismissed as tricks of light and shadow. But the audio recordings chilled me to my core. Amid the static and the sound of waves, countless voices could be heard, some pleading, others threatening, all calling my name. Despite every instinct screaming at me to leave, I knew I had to face whatever was out there one last time. As twilight approached, I made my way back to the beach, my heart pounding in my chest. The tidal pools were calm, almost eerily so. The setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and crimson, a beautiful sight that belied the horrors I had witnessed. I stood at the edge of the largest pool, steeling myself for whatever might come. That's when I saw him. A man, standing waist-deep in the water about 50 yards out, facing the shore. His form was dark, almost silhouetted against the setting sun, but I could feel his gaze fixed upon me. He stood unnaturally still, unaffected by the waves that should have been buffeting him. I called out, my voice cracking with fear, "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure began to move towards me, not swimming, but walking as if the deep water offered no resistance. As he drew closer, I could see that his eyes were pitch black, reflecting no light. His mouth opened in a grotesque smile, revealing rows of sharp, inhuman teeth. Panic overwhelmed me. I turned and ran back to the cabin, my feet barely touching the sand. I slammed the door shut, locked every window, and huddled in the corner, praying for dawn to come quickly. The whispers grew to a deafening roar outside, and shadows danced beneath the door. I knew then that my life would never be the same. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the whispers finally subsided. I wasted no time. With shaking hands, I threw my belongings into my bag, not caring about order or neatness. Every shadow, every reflection seemed to hold a lurking threat. I peered out the window, half expecting to see the dark figure standing on the beach. The shore was empty, the tidal pools innocent mirrors of the brightening sky. But I knew better now. I knew what horrors they could hide. As I loaded my car, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Dark shapes ducking behind rocks, slipping into the water. Were they real, or had fear completely overtaken my senses? I didn't stay to find out. I jumped into my car, the engine roaring to life. As I sped away from Coral Beach, I glanced in my rear-view mirror. For a split second, I saw the dark man standing in the middle of the road, his black eyes boring into mine. I blinked, and he was gone. The farther I drove, the lighter my heart felt. But I knew that what I'd experienced would haunt me forever. It's been 6 months since my terrifying weekend at Coral Beach, and I still struggle to make sense of what happened. I've pored over my photos and recordings countless times, but they offer more questions than answers. The images are always just a little too blurry, the whispers a little too indistinct to be conclusive proof. I've tried to return to my normal life, to focus on my research and writing, but I find myself unable to look at tidal pools or even large bodies of water without a sense of dread. The sound of waves, once soothing, now sets my nerves on edge. I've considered sharing my experience with colleagues, but I know how it would sound. A respected marine biologist claiming to have seen water spirits and shadow people? It would be career suicide. So I keep my secret, but it weighs on me. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear whispers carried on the wind, calling my name. And in my dreams, I see the dark man, standing in deep water, waiting patiently for my return. I know now that there are mysteries in this world far beyond our understanding, and some waters are best left undisturbed. To hear more stories like this, subscribe and leave a like.